Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Knights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 49 of Breaking Step. Tibbs's sword slid over the scaled skin without leaving a mark in spite of him adding metal to make the edge sharper this time. When he stabbed one, the sword went in fine, but they were adept at avoiding that. They're resistant to fire, Maz yelled after letting loose arrows. Of course they are, Don snapped. They're based on dragons. I don't need a lesson, Don, the archer replied. I'm not, the creature screamed, devolved into a gurgle. I was only, another flew past Tibbs, propelled by the corruption, also eating it. What does it feel like the dungeon has it in on me, as it in for me today? Oh, I don't know, Don. Ganny chuckled as Tibbs stuck a creature's leg in place to keep them from reaching the sorcerer. Why would I ever be annoyed at you after what you pulled during the game of conquest? You're not supposed to target one of them, Stowe said. That's borderline cheating. No, it isn't, she replied. It's just randomness that made these Dragoling especially sensitive to corruption. That sounds a lot like one of my reasons, which you'd then claim they'd see through. You know, when you wouldn't let me do these kinds of things. Tibbs slammed his shield into a Dragoling, and more of the spikes shattered, but those that pierced its hide, he expanded until they exploded out of it. You were helping, Tibbs, she replied. I'm not. He etched another sticky water at the Dragoling's feet, only for that to turn to steam as it stepped in it. So it's okay to adjust things if it's going to kill them, but not to help. Stowe sounded too calm for how annoyed Tibbs knew he had to be. He dodged under a claw and jumped out of the way of a tail, trying to trip him. Was Tibbs right? Am I here to just kill them? No, of course not. But like you keep telling me, who's going to tell? Tibbs? Tibbs ground his teeth at the pain from the claws cutting through his armor into his arm. He had to focus. Surviving this fight was more important than whatever they talked about. He blasted the Dracoling with an etching of water spirals until the connected line and a lot of essence pushed into it. It landed on its back, far too close for how much essence Tibbs put in, steam rising as it got to its feet. Tibbs added, making his water attack resistant to fire, to the unending list of things he needed to figure out. He blocked claws with his shield, stepped out of the way of a kick. His sword skidded over a leg as he sliced at it. The ice continued to melt, revealing the added metal. With a snarl, Tibbs stabbed it in the chest, yanking up even as the sword melted. Something's happening, Mez yelled as Tibbs reformed his sword and staggered under a punch as a gathering of essence behind the attack force caught his attention. Details, Don yelled. I don't know, just a lot of fire building, and that can't be good. Tibbs threw himself away and formed a wall of ice between him and his attackers. They were etching within the essence, more than any of Stowe's creature had managed before. Was he making them better to force them to? No, it wasn't one etching. Whatever it is, you need to stop it, Don yelled. No, it was one, but it split at the source. 3 of the creatures were making it. Etching could be done in collaboration? Ice exploded as a Dragoling slammed through. Tibbs didn't have time for this. I don't know if I can. He opened the ground under the creature, but it stopped its fall by catching the edges. That was enough. He closed the ground on it. The others seemed to be held back by the ice. You're the only one with fire as it is element, Maz. Divert it, so if you can't stop it over or around us, it doesn't matter, but I don't think we can survive whatever they're etching. Tibbs saw Maz look in this direction out of the corner of his eye. The fear, Jekyll and Cumdar had regrouped with them, keeping the Dragoling from approaching. Tibbs nodded, and the fear lessened. Diverting he could do, and Dud would think Maz was doing it. All he needed to do was timed this properly, and the etching bloomed. With a curse echoed loudly by Maz, Tibs channeled fire and shoved his will against the rolling essence, moving through the Dragaling and towards them, and behind him, his team. He shoved harder without effect. Maz formed a barrier, but his fire essence was screwed, relying on how strong the archer was to hold the attack back. Unfortunately, the etching was designed to go through pure power. He could sense that much, and there had to be something making it resistant to being wrenched away. Or maybe the Dracoling sorcerer were simply that much more willful than he was. Tibs grunted his teeth. No. He wasn't letting his team be beaten by a bunch of upright lizard just because they were able to etch together. If he couldn't push it back, then he'd do something else. He formed his etching among theirs, lines and waves. He couldn't think of how to add spirals to the lines that didn't connect to a point, but it didn't matter. He had ample essence for this, and he might have time to add it afterward. He added filigree of Ka and Fey. He needed it sticky but solid. Those were the right arcanus. Were those the right arcanus? He cursed. He didn't have time for indecision. He needed to act. He fed his etching essence and pulled as hard as he could. It moved with more ease than he'd expected. Their etching hadn't been made. Okay, this change. Come back here. He needed to act. He fed his etching and pulled as hard as he could. It moved with more ease than he'd expected. Their etching hadn't been made to prevent him from using his will against it, only to keep it from being pushed back. It had no defenses against being pulled. His smile went away as he noticed his etching changing, being deformed by what happened to the Dragonlings as he pulled. His lines were bending inward, parts snapping off under the strain, others touching and forming a point. One pointed at him. Before he could think of an option, it was rushing at him. Fire engulfed him, its roar and his pain burying Stowe again in his friend's scream. Fire fucking hurt! He pushed against it, and the pain eased enough. He felt the essence flow around him and towards his friend. Fuck that. He pulled again, harder. Fuck the pain. Better he suffer than they die. He screamed as he pulled harder still. He had space for it. He thought he had space. His immense reserve filled with a fraction of the essence he was pulling in. He suffused himself in fire and took in slightly more. He couldn't let any pass. Mez wouldn't be able to deal with this. He pulled and forced more into his reserve. When cracks formed, he willed them intact. He didn't know if he'd survived his reserve breaking this time, but he still had to force more in. Denser. He pushed and packed it ever denser. Some escaped his reserve, not through cracks, but through his channels, rolling out the way fire could roll or across a floor. It couldn't be good, but he couldn't stop. When it seemed like his channel were filled, how he perceived the surrounding shifted. He couldn't tell what any of it meant, but he saw the world around him in a way he'd never had before. Then it turned dark. He felt his panting, sensed the fire no longer around him. His fingers, his hand and knees pressed against something that had to be the floor, but he couldn't feel the cool stone. The only thing he felt was fire eating him from the inside. He might have screamed as he let excess essence explode out of him as a formless mass. He could tell through the all-encompassing pain. He felt the panting again. Unlike the last time, he wasn't cold. He also wasn't dying. His reserve was still full of denser essence. He was no longer suffused with fire. That was what he'd released, along with what had filled his channel. Those had changed. Great. More he'd have to deal with that he wouldn't be able to ask about because no one at his rank should be able to do that so much yet. He was getting tired of that. He sensed earth approaching, darkness and fire. Had a vague sense of that fire diverting the wave of essence he'd released. Jackal, Comdar, and Maz. He couldn't hear them. Jekyll, at least, should be calling for him. He might not be dying, but fire had injured him a lot. He channeled purity and suffused himself with it. When essence started moving through his channel, he pushed it back into his reserve. Now was not the time to deal with that. You okay? Jekyll sounded scared. I am. Tibbs's voice sounded raw. He'd swallowed fire and his throat wasn't healed yet. No part of him was fully healed. He moved his hand and felt the skin crack. He snapped his eyes open. No, it was his glove, darkened and cracked. He still wore gloves. They were nearly gone, but enough was left he sensed the weave working to repair them. Enough of his armor had survived. Those weaves were working too. Could he feed the essence it needed to speed up the work? What essence would they need? Whatever made up leather or something else? Tibbs? Jekyll asked, worried and winced when he looked up. I'm healing. Your face looks like that burnt desert Russell made a while back, Miss said. The one where you had to break and scrub the outer layer to get at the custard. To get at the custard. Tibbs rubbed his face and came away with flecks of burnt skin. That's not improving things, Jekyll stated. Tibbs grinned. But I'm getting there. He offered his hand to the fighter, who pulled him to his feet. His armor felt tight, like he'd worn extra clothes before putting it on. He wasn't looking forward to taking it off, which he'd have to do before they left. He wasn't sure how he'd explain exiting with his armor so damaged he could see his brown skin in place. How? Don asked. He hadn't moved. He was staring at Tibbs. No one can survive that kind of fire. Miss started. Tibbs said. Your eyes! Sorcerer exclaimed in fear. Right. Purity meant that no longer color. He couldn't let it go since he was still healing, and even if he could, the damage was done. I can explain, Don. You can explain? He laughed in a way that didn't sound entirely right. Explain? It died, and he glared at Tibbs. What the fuck is there to explain? What are you? I'm Tibbs, from the street. No one does this. Don motioned up and down. Tibbs survived being burned to ash, have the color take on that of purity when it was water before. Are you something the dragon made? The dungeon made? Some creature it sent to spy on us? Can I do that? Stowe asked. No. Tibbs replied, I don't think you can. You know what I can. I'm not some creature, he said, cutting off Stowe. This is something he trailed off. After my audience, he trailed off again. How was he supposed to explain this? Wait, after your audience? Don asked, frowning. You've been able to do this since then? Not all of it, Tibbs replied. I had to. That's how you were so fucking better than me. You fucking cheated. I didn't cheat. Tibbs snapped. It's not my fault. You didn't know to take that. Don't you fucking put that on me. I did everything the way it's done. You know what? Yeah. I am this strong because I fucking worked at it as hard as I can. I'm not some straight-born rogue cheating his way into power. I didn't cheat, Tibbs growled. The sorcerer was lucky he had to hold on to purity because the temptation to force him to cool down by blasting him with water was high. Oh, no, because the great and mighty Tibbs Lightfingers always does things the right way. He never sneaks around doing stuff behind others' back, stealing their success for his own. Don, Miss said, that's not fair. You knew about this? Miss looked at Tibbs, then away. Yeah, he finally admitted. You all knew? Don, Jekyll said, his tone firm. Now isn't the time. I know this is... Oh, I know? You know? Do you? You know so well what it's like to be thought so little of by your team they keep secret from you? He leveled his gaze on Tibbs again. I guess your no more secret talk only applied to me. What do you expect me to do? Tibbs snapped. How about being honest for once in your life? And have you run to the guild? Use this to make yourself better in their eyes? Don't stare at Tibbs. That's what you think of me? The disbelief was loud. After everything, that's all I am? What do you fucking expect me to think, Don? After all the ways you went about hurting me and my team. That was before. Before you abandoned me to Sebastian's man, you mean? Before you lied your way onto my team? Before what, Don? What the fuck did I have to go by that would prove you weren't going to put your needs to be better? Wait, what? What the fuck did I have to go by that would prove you weren't going to put your need to be better than everyone above our survival? You said you knew he told the truth, Mez said. That he believed what he said, Tibs countered. I can't know if he's going to change his mind. Knew I told the truth? Don looked perplexed, then stunned. He threw his arm out. Of course! Why would Tibs Lightfinger stop at 3 elements? Light, right? What else can you do? What other elements did you somehow steal? That's enough, Jekyll snapped. We have a room to clear. Don snorted. Of course, that's what you care about. Fuck, no wonder you've been sticking so close to him. Your man has to be wondering what you get up to with him. He's how you get all that loot. Leave Crow out of this, Don, Jekyll warned. What? Scared he's going to find out you're with another man and rip your... That's enough, Don, Mez snapped. That seemed to shock the sorcerer. Yeah, I guess it is. He glared at them, turned and walked away. Don, Jekyll called. Have fun fucking clearing the room. The sorcerer replied. I guess that's it for this run, Mez said. Jekyll sighed. Let's collect what dropped. He looked at the dragon, impassively watching them. It's not like we were going to make it to it on this run anyway. Thanks for saving our lives, Tibs. Tibs nodded and started collecting the silver coins. His armor was stiff and uncomfortable, but it was Don's reaction that discomforted him the most. Once they were out, he'd have to have a talk with the man before he told Tyrannia everything. Are you okay, Tibs? Sto asked. There's a line that went missing. Are you okay, Tibs? Sto asked. I'm fine. Healing. That's not what I mean. You did something to yourself when you absorbed all that essence. Tibs did what he'd avoided doing and sensed within. His channel were more there, better defined. Or maybe he was just more aware of them now that he'd felt so much essence flow through them. Then there was the essence in his reserve. You must have seen other runners with channels like this. A few, but they became like that over time. You were barely there. They were yours. Yours were barely there before the fight. A change that drastic can't be without consequences, right, Kenny? It would damage you, she replied. It hurt, Tib said, but it was that or the fire ate me and my team. Kenny, is there something I can do to have fire not hurt me anymore? None of the other elements I have hurt me like that. No. How the I don't need to know. How the elements work for people isn't something I was taught. Maybe you should ask Fire. It would be simple enough to arrange. Fire hurt him unless he actively controlled it away from him. So, like his second audience with water, all he had to do was let the element bring him close to death. And then what? Create yet another place around Craggle Rock with a connection to an element? How many of those before someone wondered how they were appearing? Were there books explaining how they were made? If they looked at them close enough, could they tell who had made them? Tibs still asked. It can wait. He already had so much to do anyway. They headed out once the coins were collected and his armor packed in Jackal's bottomless pouch. He put on one of the normal leather armor from the loot and was fully healed by the time they reached the exit. He was surprised Dawn wasn't there, fuming at having to wait for the rest of the team. Yeah, that's the rest of them. Before being before he'd be allowed before he'd be allowed down the stairs. Maybe Don's reputation for vindictiveness cowed even guards and clerics. He sends the sorcerer at the edge of his range, having nearly reached the town. He'd catch up he'd catch up with him in their room. They handed over the magical items, plus the handful of amulet Jackal kept and the enchanted pigs Tips planned on selling to add to Daran. Then they headed into town. Dawn wasn't in the room, nor were there indication he'd been there. Tibbs couldn't sense him, but the workers' rooming house was on the, out of his was outside. Come back here. Was outside his range from here. You know, that's kind of it. Outside his range. He laid his armor on an unused bed so it could repair itself properly. It could probably manage it in the cramped chest, but it had never been so damaged, and he didn't feel like risking it. He put on a comfortable set of clothes and climbed onto the roof. It was time to go have that talk with Dawn. And that concludes chapter 49 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to if you want to read the book and the previous one, it's up on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me and read ahead of Royal Road, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the note, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.